Welcome fellow members of the Esoteric Horde of Gamers. In my last Dystopian Wars video I showed you how to build the Ice Maiden for the Imperial fleet and the rest of the Ice Maiden Imperial fleet set. Now I'm going to paint the Ice Maiden for you, show you how it's done. And basically the ice part of the Ice Maiden is going to be painted like this. These are some foam icebergs I made up a while ago, and it's using a mix of Sybarite green, Temple Guard blue, and a bit of white scar to blend up to the white. It's very, very easy to get a good iceberg effect with these colours. I've got a makeup brush here for painting over large areas. These cheap makeup brushes are really good if you're just putting paint on and you want to cover a large area. So I put a bit of blue on my palette. Of course I'm using a red grass wet palette. Lovely company and a great wet palette. I use it all the time. So mixing up my colour and matching it to my previous iceberg terrain. And this is great because the figure will blend in really nicely with the existing terrain that I have. Now on my palette I can blend that to white, and then I can easily access whatever colours I want to get. So starting with the darkest shade, I'm painting just around the bottom edge of the model. Now you can see that of course that I've primed the whole thing with white using Citadel Spray Corax White. Corax? It's Corax, not Corax. These Citadel names, they're so difficult to remember. So it's dark right down the bottom where it's reflecting the water, and then as we get up to the top of the iceberg it's going to just blend up into the white. And I'm just using a wet blend effect, which means I blend it directly on the model itself. Doesn't matter if I go over onto some of the other areas because they're going to be painted a dark grey, so it doesn't matter if I'm quite rough with this. After I've gone around the entire base of the figure with that colour, I'm putting on the whiter blend and just blending it in very roughly on the figure itself till I get right up to pure white. If I've got too much paint on my brush, just wipe it off on a paper towel. You can see here I'm putting in the white right at the top, and then I'll blend that white down so I've got quite a nice transition. It doesn't have to be perfect again. I'm just comparing that against my iceberg terrain, making sure that the band of colour is sort of roughly in the same proportion. Once that's dry, I'll move on to all of the metallic areas using Dark Reaper, Rust Grey and Skaven Blight Dinge. I'm going to mix these together to get just the right grey that I want. I found that I didn't have a grey from the Citadel range that I really wanted. I wanted something with a slight blue tinge to it. So by experimenting a bit and mixing these together, I came up with a colour, or a grey colour, that I was happy with. And then it's just a matter of painting all of the metallic areas on the ship. Now with places like the conning tower I can be quite rough of course, but when I get close to where all the little areas touch the iceberg I've got to be quite careful and get a smaller brush to do that, or be very careful with my larger brush. The other thing is that this particular combination of paints is quite thin. I'll mix a little bit of water with it of course so it flows on nicely, but it's not giving me full coverage on the first coat, so just do one coat, it'll be quite streaky, and then wait till that's dry and do another coat and you'll have a nice solid colour. On the top of the ship I'm painting quite roughly over the wooden runway. Doesn't matter because I'll be painting brown over that later, so I can be quite rough with this paint job in most of the areas. I just want to make sure I don't damage any of the iceberg area that I've already painted. Here I've swapped to a smaller brush and I'm being a little bit more careful as I apply that grey. And here we are after one coat. As you can see it is a bit streaky, so I'll let this dry and then give it another coat. You can see after a second coat that looks much better. Nice flat grey over all of those detail areas. Now I'm going to mix some Celestra grey with my grey colour. get a much lighter grey, and use this as the basis for a light dry brush over all the grey areas, just to pick out the highlights. Using a larger brush, of course, and then just carefully dry brushing over that. And you don't want to get any sort of streakiness to this, so just lightly brush it over the sharp areas, the highlight areas, the edges, and try not to get too much streakiness. But then again, you don't have to worry about it too much. This is a big ship. It's not going to have perfect metal work. And also, I'm going to wash this afterwards as well, so you don't have to be perfect. It depends how much time you want to spend with this model. And I'll say this all the way through this video, I'm doing this pretty quickly. I don't want to obsess too much. This is a model for gaming purposes, not display. So I just want to do a good job and not spend ages carefully highlighting everything by hand. Time to do all the bare metallic areas now, and I'm using Iron Breaker for that. And of course a finer brush because this is a bit more detailed. Mix a little bit of water with that. And start painting all the bare metallic pipes and ductwork. And of course I'm being much more careful now that I get into the more detailed areas. Just paint up everything that looks like an exposed pipe. While I'm there, I'll paint the barrels of the guns. Now I'm going to continue doing the metallics by adding a bit of Retributor armor to my silver color. This gives me a kind of goldy, kind of silver, brassy kind of color that I use a lot. And for that, I'm just going to be painting the collars on the pipes, just to add a bit of metallic interest to these areas. I'm also painting the power coils, or these rib sections, in the smokestacks, and the ends of the cross on the main turret. I'll paint the cross itself with straight Celestra grey, and also the cross on the main deck. Time to do all the little planes on the deck now, and I'm using Lauren Forest for that one. Nice green colour, olive. I can be a bit rough painting these where they cross the unpainted deck, but where they cross the grey area, of course, I have to be more careful. The base colour for the decking is Dryad Bark. Lovely dark brown colour. And I'm painting all deck areas with this dark brown. Once that's dry, I'm mixing some Scrag Brown with my Dryad Brown, and I'll be using a large brush to just dab this, or sort of semi-dry brush this, into the center of the dark brown area. This gives a nice transition of browns in the middle, and it looks dark around the edges, and it works really well. Now it's time to apply some washes. For the metallic areas, I'm using Null Oil. It just goes directly on the metals. I'm also using Agrax Earthshade, and this goes on the metals that I want to have look a little bit more greasy, a little bit more oily. And really, it doesn't matter too much if I am a bit rough here and some of it goes over onto the iceberg, because let's face it, a lot of dirt and grunge would build up where the iceberg meets the metallic areas. I can spread that around a little bit by mixing a bit of water with it and just making it look a little bit dirty around the pipes, like so. I'm also using Agrax Earthshade to shade the grey areas, being a little bit careful on how this is applied. I'm just not putting it over everything, but just making sure it picks out all the detail as well. And it gives a nice sort of dirty, grungy, oily look to those grey metals or grey painted metals. Also applying that to the planes on the main deck as well, and adding a little bit of shading around them as well. You can see you get a nice dirty effect on that. I can also add a little bit of detail if I feel like it, a bit of dripping from the edges where there's been stains or drips of oil. And really, the amount of this kind of stuff you want to put on is completely up to you. I'm just doing a few tiny little spots of it to add a bit of interest to the model. And we're almost there, just a little bit more detail and we'll be finished. Things like painting little yellow stripes on the wings of the aircraft. I used Uriel yellow for that. Fenrisian grey to paint the cockpit windows. Ogrin camo to highlight the aircraft a little bit, just to pick out a little bit of detail. White scar to fill in the areas on the engine thing on the back. I'm just filling them in with white and then using a finger to rub it off the highlighted areas or the raised areas. So I fill those wells with white. Then using Nicklac oxide, and this is quite green, so I'm going to mix a little bit of Nighthaunt gloom in there as well, just to make it a bit more blue. And then I'll use this kind of wash colour to fill those white wells. I can do this really roughly, and again just use my finger to wipe it off the raised areas, and this gives a feeling of a sort of glowing engine thing at the back. Finally, I've got the weapons. I'm painting some areas, the coils and the front part of the weapon, with a mixture of Retributor armour and lead belcher. Then I'll wash that with Agrax Earthshade. I decided to use very tiny magnets to magnetise these weapons on their bases. I'm not sure if it's really worth doing. There's not a huge amount of strength there, but it just keeps them in place. And here it is, my friends, the completed Ice Maiden. And what a spectacular model. You can see it's sitting there next to some iceberg terrain. It looks fantastic. Now this was quite easy to paint, as you could see. You could spend ages and ages putting in a lot of careful little detail on here. As I said, this is a gaming piece, so I didn't want to muck around it too much. And I think this looks great for the tabletop from a distance. If you want to, of course, you could carefully paint all the little highlights and edges and just go to town on the detail. But as you can see, looking pretty good. Now I've just got to paint up the rest of my Imperium army, or my fleet I should say, and then I'll have a full Imperium fleet to take on the Commonwealth and the Enlightened. Thanks very much for watching, folks. I'll see you next time. This is the Esoteric Order of Gamers. Go to the website at orderofgamers.com to get my rule summary for Dystopian Wars.